On today's episode, we're heading back to Renaissance Italy to learn how the ultimate math geek dropped out of college and, despite nearly becoming a priest, got thrown into jail by the Inquisition only to die under house arrest, while still managing to make a discovery that ended up changing the way we look at the stars forever. Let's learn about the life of Galileo Galilei. Galileo di Vincenzo Bonuete de Galilei, wow, what a mouthful, was born on February the 15th, 1564, in the Italian city of Pisa. He was the eldest child of Giulia Ammannati, the 24-year-old daughter of a wealthy merchant, and her much older husband, 42-year-old nobleman Vincenzo Galilei, himself a prominent lutenist, composer, and theorist who contributed significantly to the musical revolution that began the Baroque era. Despite being descended from aristocracy, the family weren't well off by any means, with Galileo being sent to a monastery to begin his studies rather than the private tutoring usually expected for children of his rank. Galileo's genius was apparent even in these early days, as he showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics, astronomy, and art as a boy. He even inherited his dad's great talent for music, especially the lute of course, which he supposedly mastered with a charm of style and delicacy of touch for one so young. His ability as an artist during his boyhood was so impressive that he seriously considered becoming a painter. As an adult, Galileo joined the prestigious Academy of Drawing Arts in Florence, and advised and even instructed some of the greatest painters of his time, including Artemisia Gentileschi, the daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, one of the 17th century's most important painters. He and Artemisia were great friends and remained pen pals for life. As we mentioned earlier, however, money was tight in the Galileo household, and these dreams sadly had to be tabled, and so little Galileo was shipped off to the monastery. As adaptable as ever though, he had a blast with the monks and wanted to join the clergy himself. But like most fathers, Vincenzo thought he knew best and overruled his son's wishes, enrolling him in the University of Pisa in 1580, when Galileo was only 16. It was there that his love of math and physics resurfaced, but before Galileo could set up his cap in that direction, Vincenzo demanded his son study medicine instead. Sheesh, Dad, you're ruining my life, he must have thought. Cruel though his father's actions might seem, Vincenzo perhaps had an understandable reason for forcing his son into medicine, for though he himself was a lute virtuoso and sought-after court musician, the family was still struggling. Galileo was joined by 5 more siblings during the 1560s and 70s, and although he clearly took after Vincenzo in his flair for mathematical musical theory, we might forgive a father who didn't want to see his son fall on hard times as often as he did, knowing full well how precarious the life of a musician can be. Whether it's 16th or the 21st century, parents will be parents, and though he may have resented it, his medicinal studies did nothing to dampen Galileo's prodigious inquisitiveness, as we shall see. Barely a year into his medical degree, it is said that Galileo noticed a swinging chandelier around which air currents swirled as it swung in larger and smaller arcs. Quite an ordinary thing to the casual observer, but for an uber nerd like Galileo, it seemed, by comparison with his heartbeat, that the chandelier took the same amount of time to swing back and forth, no matter the size of the arcs. Curious Galileo set up 2 pendulums of equal length when he got home that day, and swung one with a large sweep and the other with a small sweep, determining that the pair of pendulums actually kept time together. It was not until the work of Dutch inventor Christian Huygens, nearly a century later, that the arc nature of swinging pendulum was used to create an accurate timepiece, but it all began in 1581 Pisa, with a bored teenage college student. One might wonder, given Galileo's obvious love of numbers, why he wasn't allowed to study math or physics at uni. But Vincenzo was convinced that a doctor would earn more money than a mathematician. He may have had a point, so he deliberately kept his son away from these disciplines. However, after accidentally attending a geometry lecture, as one does, he was able to talk his very reluctant father into letting him ditch medicine for mathematics and natural philosophy. Galileo thrived in his new studies, discovering the scientific principle behind the thermoscope, a precursor of the thermometer, but continued financial constraints caused our budding prodigy to drop out of university in 1585 without a degree. His curiosity wouldn't quit though, and Galileo continued his mathematical studies on his own, earning money by becoming a private tutor. During this time, he even managed to publish a small book on the design of hydrostatic balance, or timed water pump he had invented in 1586, which launched him to acclaim in the academic world. Quite the achievement, given the fact he wasn't even classes anymore. Being unburdened by lessons also allowed him to revive his interest in art, and, as we've already covered, he obtained the position of instructor at the Florentine Art Academy in 1588, where his math skills made him an excellent teacher of perspective, contrast and light composition. But within just a couple of years, Galileo returned in triumph to the University of Pisa in 1589 to teach, you guessed it, math. Being appointed as chair of mathematics at Pisa in 1590, within months of this remarkable comeback, Galileo's mechanics, mathematics, and astronomy lectures attracted some serious attention and controversy. One of his students, Vincenzo Viviani, wrote that crowds formed as Professor Galilei threw down objects from the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa, demonstrating once and for all that the speed of their fall was isolated from their weight, just like his testing of the pendulums years before. However, this theory was in direct contrast with accepted scientific notions at the time, and Galileo's work with velocity and gravity initiated vicious arguments with other academics who were insulted that the professor was undermining the very concepts he was assigned to teach. In retribution, Galileo's contract at the University of Pisa was terminated in 1592, and he left for the University of Padua. Galileo's exceptional eccentricity, controversial instructions followed him to his new post. In Padua, he continued teaching geometry, mechanics, and astronomy. His discoveries also progressed, and he made significant strides in kinematics, or the geometry of motion, principles which still form the basis of astrophysics, mechanical engineering, robotics, and biomechanics to this very day. Kinematics is even used to describe the motion of systems composed of joined parts, such as an engine, a robotic arm, or even the human skeleton. This wide range of applicability of his discoveries and observations is why Galileo is still remembered as a polymath or jack of all trades in almost any academic field, a true geekazoid. Controversy was not only limited to his professional life, as Galileo was not quite conventional in his private affairs either. Though a devout Catholic and almost priest, he wasn't too bothered with the sacrament of marriage, and associated, we shall say, with Marina Gamba, a young woman he met on his frequent trips to Venice, where he was making waves among the scholars, artists, and nobility of that city. She moved back to Padua with him and gave birth to 3 children over the course of their relationship: Virginia, born in 1600, Livia in 1601, and Vincenzo, who was born in 1606. Galileo was not named as the father on any of the 3 baptismal records. In fact, Virginia was described as daughter by fornication of Marina of Venice. With no mention of her father, on Livia's christening documents the name of the father was left out, and Vincenzo's birth papers announced father uncertain. Yikes! Seems the daddy issues he had with Vincenzo Sr. left an incredible mark on our dear professor friend. Galileo's position as a university instructor and his many friendships among the Venetian nobility probably made it unwise for him to officially acknowledge his children, since there are no surviving accounts of him and Marina having actually tied the knot. Galileo's alternative family and university track record caused him to eventually leave Padua in 1610, and he took up a position at the Medici court in Florence. His daughters accompanied him, but their mother and brother were left behind, though Vincenzo would join them in Florence a few years later. With Marina no longer in the picture by then, Galileo put his daughters in a convent. Sensing a pattern here? But did manage to have Vincenzo legitimized by Cosmo II de' Medici, the reigning Grand Duke of Tuscany, ruler of the city of Florence, and former pupil of Galileo. Nothing like having friends in high places, huh? In his 1619 request for this, Galileo finally declared that at the time of his cohabitation with Marina, that they had never been married, and that she had already died by the time the act was drawn up. Vincenzo studied law and later became a famous lutenist in his own right, following in the family footsteps just like his namesake grandfather. Galileo has gone down in history as the inventor of the telescope, but this is actually slightly inaccurate. Kudos for this invention rightfully belongs to the Dutch eyeglass maker, Hans Lippershey, but Galileo was the first person to point the optical instrument skyward and conduct detailed studies of the heavens. Lippershey's 1608 patent application for the device is the earliest on record. Nevertheless, because the Dutch government decided this initial telescope design was too easy to copy, no official patent was granted. In 1609, Galileo learned about the device and developed one of his own, significantly improving Lippershey's original tool. These newer telescopes were also a profitable side hustle for Galileo, who sold them to merchants who found them useful both at sea and as items of trade during the Age of Exploration. Later the same year, Galileo began pointing his new toy at the moon and discovered it had craters and mountains, debunking the common misconception that the moon's surface was perfectly smooth. This was possible because of his perfections of magnification, allowing him to make accurate charts which estimated the heights of the lunar mountains and the sizes of its craters. This was also put to good use by Giugoli, another painter friend of Galileo, who included a realistic depiction of the moon in one of his pieces, probably using his own Galilean telescope to make the observations. Our moon wasn't the only heavenly body observed by Galileo. On January the 7th, 1610, Galileo observed with his telescope 3 fixed stars, totally invisible, all close to the planet Jupiter and lying in a straight line through it. On January the 10th, he noted that one of them had disappeared, an observation which he attributed to it being hidden behind Jupiter. Within a few days, he concluded that they were actually orbiting Jupiter, and that he had, in fact, discovered 3 of Jupiter's 4 largest moons. The 4th was discovered on January the 13th, and Galileo named this foursome the mathematician stars in honour of his patron and pupil, Duke Cosimo II, and his 3 brothers. Later, astronomers, however, renamed them the Galilean satellites in his honour. Galileo's observations of the satellites of Jupiter, like everything else in his life, caused great dispute among astronomers, as a planet, the smaller planets orbiting it, did not conform to the accepted principles of the time, which then held that all heavenly bodies should circle the Earth, and many astronomers and philosophers initially refused to believe that Galileo could have made such an outlandish discovery. Nonetheless, geeky Galileo saw practicality in the uproar and used these findings to determine the east-west position of ships at sea, which required their clocks to be synchronized with clocks in the prime meridian, thus solving a long-standing problem of longitude, which had great importance to safe navigation. Throughout the 1610s, Galileo would continue to make groundbreaking observations in the night sky, observing the phases of Venus, glimpsing the rings of Saturn, briefly spying the as-yet undiscovered Neptune, and confirming the existence of sunspots and the cluster of stars we now call the Milky Way. But the discontent among his colleagues in the scientific and religious communities was beginning to pile up. Galileo's conflict with the Church and the majority of educated people of his day stemmed from the popularity subscribed view that the Earth was the centre of the universe, with all heavenly bodies, including the planets, the Moon and Sun, orbiting around it. This belief was born out of the clergy who pointed to biblical passages implying the fixed nature of the Earth. Galileo's telescopic observations flew in the face of such traditional assumptions, and though he was certainly not the first proponent of this theory, his infamy and copious amounts of publications and scientific contributions made him impossible to ignore. So, the Church moved to silence him in the only way they could at this point, by having him interrogated, convicted as a heretic, and imprisoned by the Roman Inquisition in June 1633. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Geeking Out with Galileo Galilei from History Made Simply. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and watch our next episode.